In this section, we're going to talk about sound design. If anyone has seen the 1952 film Singing in the Rain, you are already familiar with the difficulties presented to filmmakers after the development of synchronized audio. Remember this term, it'll come up later. One of the first films to have what we might consider the equivalent of modern audio was the 1927 talkie, The Jazz Singer. Jazz Singer used a system called the Vitaphone, in which the phonograph audio recording and the camera were synchronized by wiring the two apparatuses together so one switch controlled both devices. The recordings were sent to the theaters where audio and film were synchronized for each showing. The term synchronized audio comes from this process. Synchronized audio is anything that you hear which corresponds to the sequence on screen. There's one main term to remember when discussing audio, the term diegetic. We use this in our narrative section as well. Diegetic audio refers to anything that the characters can hear. Dialogue, for example, is diegetic since we see the characters talking and hear them talking. This could also be considered synchronized diegetic audio because the speech has to be synchronized with the movement of the characters' mouths. Alternatively, if we hear a car moving in the background, out of view, this would be non-synchronous diegetic sound, since the sound can be heard by the characters and exists in the narrative, but doesn't have to be synchronized with any visual component of the sequence. To further complicate things, there are different types of diegetic synchronized sound and asynchronized sound. Internal diegetic sound, or sound that only one character can hear, but is still represented in the story. For example, in Baby Driver, when Baby is listening to his iPod, we hear the sound, he hears the sound, but no one else hears the sound. Again, this can be synchronous or asynchronous. Going back to Baby Driver, during several sequences, we see Baby reacting to the beat of the music in his headphones. This audio would need to be synchronized with the visual components, so it is diegetic, synchronous audio. In Singing in the Rain, the main problem the character is experiencing is trying to figure out how to capture their leading lady within the limits of early film audio technology. Until 1927, film was more similar to what we saw in Sherlock Jr. You might have a Wurlitzer, a large organ, a recording, or a band playing music during the film. It was even rare for films to have studio-produced compositions. Audio recording equipment also limited the movement of the camera since they picked up the sound of the camera, or the sound of the motor. Camera had to be soundproof, making them heavy and difficult to use. As a way of dealing with this issue, non-diegetic sound was used with scenes where characters weren't speaking or objects were not making noise. Non-diegetic sounds such as voiceover or soundtrack were used to set the tone of certain scenes, or like a literary narrator, deliver spoken exposition. Non-diegetic sound is any sound that is not present in the story that can't be heard by the characters. Non-diegetic sound can be synchronous, but it's rare. For example, in Apocalypse Now, during the Dulong Bridge sequence, characters off-screen shout, "Can you hear the music?" but the characters on-screen don't seem to be aware of any music playing. Or in Blazing Saddles, when we're introduced to Cleavon Little's character, we hear a band playing in the soundtrack that Little doesn't seem to hear until an actual band in the middle of the desert comes into frame for the lulls. Traditionally, in musicals, the musical performances are considered non-diegetic. This isn't always the case, but the music isn't actually happening in the world of the film. It's delivering exposition in the same way that a narrator might use in voiceover. Keeping this in mind, the following section will look at more specific examples of how sound is being used in film. Like in It Follows, where ambient music sets a tone, in Jaws, where the soundtrack denotes the presence of the shark, or in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where a lack of diegetic sound signals that there are no longer any human beings left on Earth.